So again today, just want to do a little bit of reiteration, recap, cover some ground again, and then move a little bit forward. Similar sort of passages, but I want us to be in no doubt. Even this one, I'm thinking, even for those of us who preach, who teach the word, and however many years we've been in the Lord and been walking with Him and doing our best to be, the best Christians we can be, we can still benefit from a refreshing of why it's important to walk a certain way. Why is it important to be a firm disciple, a strong disciple indeed? Okay, what is the basis for it? What's the foundation for it? And that's what I've been looking at and will look at again today. Okay, so last week looked at John chapter 6. You don't have to open to it. And in verse 66, having taught for a while, as a result of this, many of his disciples withdrew and were not walking with him anymore. So Jesus said to the 12, do you not want to go away also, do you? You do not want to go also, do you? And Simon Peter answered, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Okay, so thankfully, Peter, on behalf of the true disciples then and the true disciples today, he said, come on, Lord, we're with you for life. We've seen too much. We've heard too much. We're with you for life. And so the point from last week, some of the points from last week is that it is possible for a disciple to unfollow Christ. Which is why Jesus said later on, a couple of chapters later in another scenario, which is where we started the whole series from in John chapter 8:31. And he said, if you continue in my words, he said to new believers, those who have just believed in him, if you continue in my words, then you will be my disciples indeed, not just my disciples. Because just disciples can choose to unfollow. But those who are indeed disciples will live the rest of their lives following Jesus Christ. And to them is salvation ordained. Okay? So we looked at the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will not thirst. We looked at all that, some of the tenses, continuous and repeated action, and the fact that it is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. The flesh represents natural human effort and willpower. And although we are supposed to give ourselves to these things with everything, we appreciate that it is the Spirit-filled words of Christ, okay, that brings transformation. We must insist on doing life the way His Word teaches. We must insist on finding His mind for as many aspects of living as possible, especially the popular cultural issues and the endemic traditional issues. And then we ended last week with Matthew 7:24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them, that's the, in capital letters there. Those who hear these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock, and the rain fell and the floods came, and the wolf huffed and puffed and blew all he could, and it slammed against the house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell and the floods came by. The winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Thereafter, we had that small discussion, didn't we? Which wasn't on video, about, is it possible to be saved and then become unsaved? Or is it possible? Is it once saved, forever saved? And I kind of confirmed that. That really, again, is approaching the concept, the ideas from a sort of almost debating point of view. What's important is that we all be true disciples to the end. That is the crucial thing. Okay? We bear personal responsibility for choosing to follow Christ. So you do that. Take on that responsibility and follow Him till the end of your days. And then it can be said of you that you were saved and you were always saved. Okay? So we're not trying to find how close we can get to the edge and still survive. We're trying to find how close we can get to Jesus. How close all the time. Okay? So today, I want to explore a little bit more, develop a little bit more about this discipleship, following and unfollowing. All right? So let's go back to John chapter 6. That was where they unfollowed him, right? In verse 66. But we're going to start from verse 60 today. Look at what developed into them unfollowing him. Okay. Start from 60 today. Again, he had been talking some fairly heavy stuff, right? About belonging to him and about salvation in parables. And in verse 60, the Bible says, when his disciples heard this, many of them said, I want us to note here, just pause for a second. It uses the term disciples, not just followers. So we're not talking any old, churchgoer. These are people who've already demonstrated that they're interested, at the very least, interested in what he's saying and interested in doing life the way he wants them to do life. Those are disciples. It's exactly the same term that is used in John chapter 8 later on, okay? Many of them said, this is a hard and difficult and strange thing. I'm reading from the Amplified. This is a hard and difficult and strange thing. It's an offensive and unbearable message. Who can stand to hear it? Who can be expected to listen to such teaching? These are disciples saying this is very offensive and unbearable. The question for you and I today is, do we ever come across anything in the scriptures, in the words of Christ, or the words especially of his apostles, that we say, this is unbearable, this is offensive, this cannot possibly mean what it seems to mean? And there are many things in our time like that, ranging from gender equality, okay, masculinity, feminism, all sorts of things that the Bible speaks into that you will read sometimes and you might think, well, that's not fair, is it? This is offensive, basically is what you're saying. This is unbearable. Who can stand to hear it? Who can be expected to listen to such a teaching? Verse 61. But Jesus, knowing within himself that his disciples were complaining and protesting and grumbling about it, he said to them, is this a stumbling block and an offense to you? Does this upset, shock, and scandalize you? What then will be your reaction if you should see the Son of Man ascending to the place where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life. He is the life giver. The flesh conveys no benefit whatsoever. There is no profit in it. The words of truth that I have been speaking to you, they are spirit and they are life. But still, some of you fail to believe and trust and have faith. For Jesus knew from the first who did not believe and who had no faith, and who would betray him and be false to him. And he said to them, this is why I told you that no one can come to me except it is granted to him, and able to do so by the Father. And verse 66, after this, many of his disciples drew back, returned to their old associations. The Amplified Bible says, they drew back, they withdrew, and returned to their old associations, and no longer accompanied him. No longer accompanied him. Okay. Let's look at this a little bit more. So he had been talking about eating my flesh, drinking my blood, and all that sort of stuff, which, okay, can be a little bit confusing. Like, whoa, what are you going on about, Jesus? But instead of asking questions, which in some other parts of the of the Gospels, you find people actually saying, oh, can we ask you a question about that? What do you mean by that? Instead of asking questions for understanding, they got offended. And they decided, we're not doing this. This is just too offensive. Now, like I said before, let's think for ourselves, each one of us. Have you been in a situation where you found a message offensive? Did you then choose to try to understand what was being said and the truth that might be contained in what's being said? Or did you just say, that possibly cannot be what it means, and scratch it and moved on? Let us be careful as disciples of Christ when we hear a sermon or a teaching or a preach, or we read the Bible for ourselves and we hear something and we read something. Let us rather seek understanding than disagreement. Because anyway, friends, you cannot really sensibly disagree with anything until you properly understand that thing. If you don't understand something, you can't really disagree with it, because the question will be asked, what are you disagreeing with? You don't even understand it, you know. So let's be aware of that. This could have been us. I don't get it, therefore I'm out. That's what happened here. Now, Jesus in verse 61, I was reading this and studying this, I'm thinking, this Jesus is a bit of a cheeky guy sometimes. You know, in the times we live in, if you were teaching something or preaching something and somebody said or expressed to you in some way that you got and you understood that you were being offensive, because that's another word that we don't tolerate today, right? And the most offensive ones are the ones that actually claim to be offended, frankly, as far as I'm concerned. And somebody says, "Oh, I find that quite offensive." The natural thing to do, or the social norm thing to do, would be to back off a little bit, right? To just say, oh, okay, I didn't mean to be offensive. And you try to, suddenly you're put on the back foot, never mind the person who doesn't understand you. Now you have to explain yourself, and then you have to kind of apologize and move on. Jesus didn't do any of that. In fact, in verse 61, he ups the ante. He pushes the envelope a bit more. He stresses them out a little bit more. He says, you're grumbling about this. Does this upset you? Does this offend you? What then will you do if I tell you that you're going to see the Son of Man ascending on this place where it was before? It gives them something even tougher to chew on. It's like, if this is going to offend you, what are you going to do about this next one then? It pushes it a little bit more. We live in a time, and this is part of why I keep making this emphasis. We live in a time where people want Christians to back off. They want us to back off many topics. You begin to say a little about what you believe and what the Word has taught you in the words of Christ and the word of his apostles about living this kind of life, living that kind of life, and somebody's going to tell you to back off. You're being offensive. What are we going to do at that moment? Back off? Somebody says it's probably the wise thing to do, you know. Why are you going to cause problems unnecessarily? Now, there is some sort of point to that, because we're not Jesus. He is infinitely wise, and the Bible says he knew already those who were going to fall away anyway, and he knew already those who were going to betray him. We don't always know like that. So it is good not to go out to offend somebody, but if we are talking about the words of Christ and the implications of it in our lives, don't be afraid of holding your ground. Standing your ground. Don't be shy of it. Both in your life personally and while you're dealing with other people. By that I mean, if I read something or come to understand something from somebody's preaching, I don't want to be afraid of inculcating it. I don't want to be afraid of adapting it to my life if I recognize it as the truth. It's the same thing I've been saying. Disciples yield. Disciples embrace. Disciples execute. Disciples understand. They update. So I may have believed something else up to this point, and this guy or this lady preaches something else, and I think, oh, okay, I understand that better now. I understand that different. That's understanding. Then I update my worldview, my belief system. Then I embrace it and then execute it. Don't be shy and afraid of changing your life because the word of God has come to you afresh. Okay? Don't be shy of that. We all have the fear of change to an extent, okay? And the reticence to upend our lives because of new information, which will much rather sweep some things under the carpet and say, that it's not such a big deal. Let's just leave it alone. But once we've been challenged by the word of God, the appropriate response is not walking away in offense. The appropriate response is to update my understanding, to embrace and to execute what I've just heard. That's personally. Now, in relation to other people, when I'm speaking to somebody about the gospel, I'm teaching or I'm preaching, it might be a non-Christian, it might be a Christian. If I am convinced to a certain extent that this is the truth I am teaching that, and they want to use the offense card, you know what I mean by that? They want to pull the offense card on you. No, I'm not necessarily going to back off. It's one thing to say, I don't understand what you're saying. Help me understand what you're saying properly, and maybe in a particular context. It's another thing to pull the offense card and say, well, actually, I find what you're saying offensive. Oh, you're just talking rubbish. Some will go in that direction, be equally offensive. You're just talking rubbish. No, I don't back down. And I don't teach anybody. I don't want to advise any of us as Christians to back down on such subjects. Again, one of the more common ones is this business of marriage or no marriage. Is this business of cohabitation or not cohabitation? Just last week, I had a lady in the car with me we were talking about, and she's a lovely woman, and she, in fact, one of the most talkative ones I've ever met, to be honest with her. She talked to a lovely woman. She wanted to talk about her family, about her. She married, as it happens, great stuff and all that. But when it came to her kids, the first one she talked about was not married. And she talked about, I wasn't soliciting information, but she was talking about how he had met this girl in Talsan, and within a few months they were so intimate, and he was thinking already of moving, to live with her, and then things didn't work out and he's back where he was and whatnot. So I said, were they going to get married? Or something to that extent, I said, no, but just as well they didn't anyway. I said, well, marriage is a good thing. It's good for everybody. If they're going to get romantic, they might as well get married, right? We're just talking here. I'm driving, she's in the back, and she got a little bit defensive. It's short. And it comes like this. At least I've noticed. Some of it comes like this. Surely it's just whatever works for everyone, isn't it? It comes like that. I said, no, not actually. It's not whatever works for everyone. There is what is best for everyone. What is best is not always what everyone does. Oh, really? Yeah, really. So, I could go on a little bit because that carried on for a while and then we kind of moved on to another subject. But I could have backed down and just said, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, whatever works for everyone. What I would have just done there is agreed with her. What I would have just done there as well is betray the trust of my faith. I just betrayed myself. Your brain, even your physical brain, even in the world of psychology there, which I've been reading quite a bit of recently, even your brain will be a little bit confused. Thinking, but that's That's not what you believe. Why would you say that? Apparently, such stuff's going on in here. And if you do it consistently enough, you become more of a confused person than a certain person, a person with certainty. Because you believe something, but with a little bit of a push, you're going to back off and say, well, yeah, okay. But didn't really get rid of your belief. So there are two things there. You become more of a confused person in life. It's better to stand up and maintain that position than to just back off without fresh understanding. Now, I'm not saying we never back off. If we learn and gain fresh understanding about a matter, then you adopt and update your understanding, then embrace and execute it. But in relation to the world we live in, the Bible already told us not to be squeezed into the mold of this world. If we know the truth from the mouth of Jesus and from his apostles already, that is the truth, no matter how offended anybody feels about it. That is the truth. Just because someone is offended does not mean we back down. Sometimes it means we press the issue further. Maintaining that Jesus' word is the truth. Maintaining that the scriptures are the truth. That's what the Lord taught us. And sometimes I insert that. So, well, I'm coming from what the Lord has taught me, or what the Lord taught, or what the Lord teaches. And I let them know clearly where I'm coming from. And sometimes people have actually appeared to embrace or gain some understanding, because behind the truth are benefits and reasons as to why we should live like that. Okay? Just very quickly, let me throw one or two things out before I carry on. For instance, even about marriage, not just Christian marriage, just marriage, because God instituted marriage, not Christian marriage. Do you get that? He instituted marriage in Eden. He didn't institute Christian marriage. So marriage is for all humanity. It didn't start somewhere after Abraham. It didn't start somewhere after it is for all of humans. And that's why the benefits of marriage, even as shown us by studies, good studies and research, applies to everyone generally. Now, of course, we as believers, because of the faith we have in it, should also give us better results, Okay. So we have results like, the benefits of marriage, like those who are married, children who are brought up by parents who are married, who are living together, who are collaborating, do much better in life altogether than children who are brought up by either cohabiting or separated parents. This research was done not by Christians, by university professors and scholars through the ages, and it's corroborated throughout the world. UK, US, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, the same results they're getting everywhere. Long-term studies that followed children from birth right into their 40s and 50s, and they have all kinds of elements and parameters that they're measuring, and at the end they aggregate, they bring together all these elements when that child is now finally 50, and they compare it to what's happened in that child's life between age 0 and age 18, and they draw out all these outcomes. And the outcomes generally is that there is at least a 45 percentile difference between the nearest thing to marriage and marriage in the lives of those children. And the nearest thing to marriage is faithful cohabitation, which is where people have been living together for as long as any married person has been living together faithfully, without any treachery, without any betrayal in there. That's the nearest thing you get to marriage. In fact, that's what people often say, it's as good as marriage, isn't it? Well, it's not, actually, because there's about 40-45%, depending on the study you look at, difference in those children's lives to do with, I didn't even mean to say all this today, but just might as well, to do with mental health well-being, physical health, well-being. You get success in their chosen vocation and careers. You've got propensity to criminality. That is, how likely is your child likely to end up in jail and to smash the neighbor's window, etc., etc. You get stable identity and a sense of confidence, meaningful contribution to society, and so on and so forth. I could go on. I could pull studies on you here. They were not made by church people, these studies, but they show and demonstrate clearly that marriage is a better way of doing life than not. Clearly. And that's just about children there. Now, I could go into the married people's lives themselves and compare them to unmarried people's lives, and there are stats and stats and stats. Like I told you, I'm writing a book on marriage right now, so I've had to do a lot of research and study. And some of it to me is like, and some of it has re-educated me actually about some of the things I thought about, I knew, and didn't really know. The individual married person is usually healthier than the individual cohabiting person in the long run, measured over a period of decades. Usually. Healthier mentally, healthier physically. And so on and so forth. We can carry on like that, It deals with all kinds of arenas. Now, so when the Bible teaches that it's the preferred way to go, it's with all these things in the background of it, that there is a good reason for it, folks. A good reason for it. And as believers, when we do it right, we get even more benefit, apart from honoring our God and having joy from the smile of God. Okay, so that's just a quick aside. Why we don't back down. Yeah, but people get divorced. Yeah, they do. Doesn't mean we're going to get divorced. Yeah, relationships fail. Yeah, they fail. Doesn't mean ours will fail. Besides, it's better to get married, even if it's your third time, fourth time over, than to simply shack up with somebody. Sorry if that term is funny. I say it, then I realize that somebody in here.
I'm not offended.
I say it. I didn't. That sorry. But it's it is. Just like that woman Jesus met at the well in John chapter 4. He said, "Go get your husband." He didn't say, "Go and get your partner." And in the world we live in today, people are trying to substitute spouse, husband, wife with partner. Many times when you're out there, they ask you about your partner, not your wife or your husband. And I remind them, my wife, not my partner, my wife. I want you to know I'm married. There is a difference. There is a difference. So Jesus said to that woman, "Go and fetch your husband, not your partner." And she said, "I don't have one." He said, "Yeah, you've spoken right. You've been married 5 times. And you're with one you're not married to right now." Is it 5 times or 4 times? Anyway, 5 is in there somewhere. But it didn't really, I don't believe he said that in a condemnatory way, like, "Oh, you're constantly remarrying." Remarrying is a better option than shacking up. Or what's a different term for that? Than cohabiting. Yeah, that's a more technical term for it. It's a biblically better option. Now, I know not every Christian, well, if somebody ever listens to this is going to say, "Ooh, you should remarry or not remarry." That's a debate for another time. You can come have it over coffee. But I would rather see a divorced person remarried to somebody else than simply living with that person. Those are the options I'm talking about. I'm not saying every divorced person should remarry. That's another conversation entirely. But if they're finding that they cannot live without a partner, then we resort to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, which says, in order to avoid immoralities, get married. And that would apply to everybody, divorced or not. In order to avoid immoralities, that is, you can't hold yourself. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. You can't hold yourself. You can't keep yourself. Get married. That's what the Bible teaches. Everybody. Married, you may divorced, widowed, widower. If you're going to start doing this thing, which is worse, which has worse consequences, then you might as well marry the person. They say, oh, I can't find somebody to marry. Well, you find someone to sleep with. Especially if it's regular, like you're not going around the whole country doing different counties, you know. You're not going around the states in America doing different states. If it's the same person that you've been living, marry them. And I challenge people on that regularly. I mean, I was at Poblado a while ago having coffee with some friends. We walked there and met this lovely guy who was Larry's classmate? Anyway, they're there, oh, hello, how are you? So he said something about his girlfriend. I don't even know how we got there. I said, whoa, you guys are living together, aren't you? He said, yeah, it's been 5 years and whatnot. I said, why won't you marry her? He was taken aback, almost like the what's your business kind of thing. Well, you told me you were living with somebody. That's none of my business. Why'd you tell me that? What am I supposed to say? Oh, well done. You know, like everybody's supposed to say, well done. No, I said, marry her. I said, we're not ready. I said, you're ready to sleep with her, though. Toda was like, because Toda was there. Austin, it was me, Austin, and Toda that went on a walk last time they were here. Toda was like, whoa. You still mentioned it last week, actually. Like, you know, the guy that you, Austin didn't quite know what to do with himself. You know, Austin was the guy who was here last week, the doctor friend. So I said, well, you know, she's good enough to be slept with for years, but not good enough to marry. He said something like, actually, I've never thought about it like that before. Well, there you go. You see, some of the truths and the power we carry, people have never thought about it before. Until we are bold enough to actually say it to them in a certain way, it's never occurred to them in that way. They say they're committed, but they're shy of signing on the dotted line. I'm committed to you for life, but you will not sign on the dotted line. Say that to the mortgage company. Go and say that to your bank manager. Go and say that to your employer. Go and say it to anybody. I mean, even a stranger steps into Margaret's working area there, they have to fill in a form. They can't just say, I don't have COVID, there's nothing wrong with me, I don't need to fill your form. You can't get away with those things. It's only when it comes to some of these things, and the devil has a field play in it, that people want to get away with that. I'm committed to you for life. Well, sign on the dotted line then. Tell me in the way that for us as Christians, the Bible says you should tell me. And we've already been through that. There is no such thing as a marriage without a ceremony that is witnessed. You can't have a private marriage, just the two of you in your bedroom. Just because you slept with someone doesn't mean you're married to them, even though your soul is joined to them, which is an unhealthy thing. Because if you broke up, then there is that soul separation, which is a bit of giving a piece of your mind away, and so on and so forth. You know, so that's just one example. We looked at money, we looked at other things. We're just saying, listen, we don't always have to back down personally about our own lives, and we don't always have to back down when we're trying to preach the gospel, which is the good news, by the way. The words of Jesus are supposed to be good news to people. Well, we don't have to back down. You don't have to back down. Look at just one more passage. We'll round up this morning. I got carried away there a little bit. Matthew 7. Do you remember we ended last week with that passage, Matthew 7, 24, 25? Again, that I want to back up and go to the previous verses before he starts talking about huffing and puffing and blowing the house down. Something led to that, because I think that started with therefore. Wherever you see therefore, is there for something, So it starts with therefore. Wherever you see therefore, you need to go and read the previous verses. So we did therefore last week. Now let's look at verses 13 to 23. Because we looked at 24 and 25, last week. Let's look at 13 to 23. Matthew 7. Can somebody read it for us, please?
From the beginning, or just 13?
13 to 23, yeah.
Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who going by it, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven.
Amen.
Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness.
Okay, thank you. See how that relates to what you shared with me this morning, Lisa, about acting on the word. And we see the same thing is shown in that parable of building on the rock or building on the sand. And you already, those who hear me and who do what they hear are the ones who are building on the rock. Okay? Well, let me draw out some things from this bit we just read now. Yeah? So in verses 13 and 14, it says, disciples enter through a narrow way. That narrow way is Jesus. Jesus only. Jesus only. It's narrow. People are going to call you narrow-minded. That's okay. Christians are narrow-minded people. Disciples are narrow-minded. It doesn't mean we don't know other things. We know a lot of other things, but we choose only one way. Jesus only, not mixed with anything else. Do you remember Deborah? When in the years and years before you started coming here, Deborah was coming here before she came to Christ. And she would listen to a whole sermon, and at the end of it, she would say, can you have a word with me? I said, yes, sure. And we'll be talking. And she would always want to add something else to the message. She said, yeah, she believes all that, but Buddha said pretty much the same thing, didn't he? This and that, so it can't be wrong to do this. And I would spot it, and I'll say, no, Jesus only. Jesus only. Only Jesus. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one goes to the Father except through me. Jesus only. And she did that for several months on different occasions until she finally came to faith and accepted Jesus only. Now, I don't know what sort of life she's living right now. I hope it's a good one. Don't say anything. But, Jesus only is the thing. Okay? Disciples enter through a narrow way, and that is, we should not be simply following or flowing along with our popular or normal culture, but rather ensure that our general goals and directions are Christ approved. In verse 16, we should look for right and correct fruitfulness. This is where it gets a bit interesting, and I'll try and be quick with it. Pick it up next time. You see, there are certain outcomes of life that matches up with the teachings of Christ and his apostles. It is the presence of these things that are evidence of true disciples. It's the evidence, that's the fruitfulness of a certain character, certain outcomes of life that are evidence of discipleship, of being true disciples. We have to look for the correct fruit and look to the correct fruit in our lives and in other people's lives. Jesus said, you cannot gather figs from thistles. You know, I always thought I knew what a thistle looked like until yesterday. You know, in my imagination, I've been reading this passage for years, for decades. Never bothered to check what a thistle actually was. Does anybody know what a thistle is?
Yeah, the purple.
Bendies, what can we call them? Bendies.
Okay, you're probably right, the way it looks.
Grow it with scouts of it, then they stick to you then.
That's right. That's not what I had in mind. I had a different kind of weed in mind. So I said to myself, let me even check in my study mode what a thistle is. And I saw the images. I thought, okay, no wonder that Jesus said you can't get figs from thistles. And you can't gather grapes from, what was it he said? From something else there. Basically saying, look, if it's an apple tree, if it's got apples on it, it's an apple tree. If it's got oranges on it, it's an orange tree. You can't claim a tree is something without the evidence that it is that thing. And then that got me thinking, this is, maybe I got distracted, maybe something. Figs cannot grow on thistles. And apples cannot grow on orange trees. This principle applies to even what we call cocktail trees. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
Now, I knew it. So as I was studying this, I'm thinking, Jesus, what you're saying here, I think it doesn't match up with some aspects of my knowledge. And I don't know if you've ever been there. That's what I'm saying. I chose not to be offended and walk away and say, surely this stuff cannot mean anything. It must mean something. It's because I know that you can have multiple types of fruits from one tree.
Grafting.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can make it happen.
Yeah.
You can make it happen. You can have plums from a nectarine tree coexisting. You can have different species of apples on the same. So I had to go and study that as well. Had a quick look, had a quick study. Let me read something to you. A copy and paste. Yeah. Are you considering growing fruit trees in your yard but can't decide which one? Maybe you've limited space and you're torn between types of fruit. What would you say to a fruit tree that bears several kinds of fruit at once? It may seem too good to be true, but you really can grow more than one kind of fruit on a single tree. How is this possible? It is done by grafting, a method of asexual plant propagation. With grafting, one or more new types of fruit can be grown on an existing fruit tree. At that point, I'm like, oh, Jesus, what were you saying? The fruits must be in the same family for this to work.
The same family.
You can't grow oranges and apples on the same tree, this expert said. One of the beautiful things about these kinds of trees is that the fruit maintains its own flavor and other characteristics, including ripening time. This means that the different types of fruit on your tree can ripen at different times, so you've got a longer fruit harvest. I just read that because it's a whole quotation. I didn't want to slash in between. But the key thing for me was that the fruits must be in the same family for this to work.
Like the Jews and
Sorry?
like the Jews and the Gentiles.
Yeah. They have to be grafted in, grafted out, grafted in, grafted, but they have to be in the same family for it to work. So when Jesus is talking about fruitfulness, it's saying it still follows. An apple tree is still an apple tree. It can have several species of apple on it at the same time. And I understand there are over 7,000 different types of apples. The most common cocktail apple tree is 3 apples on a tree. But you can get up to, there's a bloke who's managed to get up to 260 different type of apples on one tree. And you can also, you can point to them all. But it's still an apple tree. It's still an apple tree, which brings us to Galatians chapter 5. The fruit of the Spirit is what? Love, joy, and peace, meekness, temperance, faith. You can call them different species of the same fruit. That's why it doesn't say the fruits of the Spirit. The fruits of the Spirit. It was not a plural, it's a singular. So at some point in time, like this, and I read a bit more about this, I read some more, and I want a cocktail tree now, and I read more about this. Apparently, if you have to look after these things very well, which is probably not me, it probably just died, or else some fruit can take over. And you start getting less of this and less of that. You have to be able to prune properly at the right time. Which again takes us back to what we're looking at in John chapter, what was it now? Is it 15? About I am the vine, you are the branches. My Father is the one who does the pruning to make sure everything is well balanced. So Jesus knew what he was talking about. Of course he knew what he was talking about. We're the ones who have to understand what he's talking about. And unfortunately for us sometimes, and I've probably been there, we choose offense rather than understanding. We just say that possibly can't mean what it's trying to say. And you move on to something else. You just unfollowed Jesus there. You just unfollowed him on that matter. On that matter. I am one, as Margaret knows this of me, I try to, maybe it's a proclivity or whatever, but I think everyone should at least practice it to an extent. Try to drill down to the bottom of the issue. What is the issue here? Especially when we're having Christian discussions. I'm going to end here. That was interesting enough to end on, actually. So not only about the fruitfulness, identify a tree by its fruit, but also the consistency of the fruitfulness. I'll open that up a bit more next time. That it's one thing for a tree to bear fruit this season. It's another thing for that tree to be skipping seasons. Something's not right. What Jesus is looking for is not just the fruit, but consistency of fruitfulness. It's all contained in that language there, which I'll break down for us next time. He doesn't want us skipping seasons. Psalm chapter 1 says that as well. Says the tree that is planted by river waterside and shall always bring forth fruit in its season. Always bring forth fruit. So you have to be a little bit dubious if one day somebody's behaving like a Christian and then the next day they're behaving like the devil's son. And that is the only consistency you know. Today they're like this, tomorrow they're like that. Today they're like this, tomorrow they're like that. Jesus is saying that's not what the kind of fruitfulness we're talking about. So it's the quality of the fruit and the consistency of the fruitfulness. We'll approach it again next time. May the Lord give us understanding. Let us pray.